Well, we are in a series on politics called Talking Points, and we are going to continue that today. It'll be a shortened message, just a little bit of kind of points, but then the Bible and some things to share. And then there's also going to still be some more conversation around your table. You've got to know everybody. We're also going to have some kind of continued conversation after the message. So week one of our talking points, we talked about how we need to break out of our echo chambers, that many of us have echo chambers that continue to kind of churn the same information to us, and how breaking out of that, considering different perspectives, can be very helpful to us as we consider how we solve the problems that exist within our world, which is what politics is, how we organize and how we solve problems together in our communities. Week two, we talked about how we lead with empathy, that ultimately Jesus models love and empathizing with one another. And we have to lead with empathy in our solving of problems. If we don't consider other people and what they're going through when we try to solve a problem, or how it might affect somebody, how it might harm somebody, then we're not probably leading in the way in which Christ would have us interact in our world and solve problems within our world. One of the things we say each week in this series is that Jesus was political. And that's kind of a controversial statement, because a lot of people hear that and they say, well, that means Jesus was partisan. No, Jesus was political, just meaning that from birth to death and just about everything in between, the life of Jesus was politically charged. He was placed into a time and a place where Rome was oppressing his people, and therefore every move he makes just about is political. Even the shirt I'm wearing, Jesus was a refugee. If someone came up to me today when I was at Starbucks and they said, but he was a refugee by choice, meaning that he came from heaven to earth as a refugee by choice. And I said, he was also a refugee because of the political system of his day when he went to Egypt. And they go, oh yeah, I never thought of it that way. That's literally what they said. And I was like, yeah. That's true. That's in the Bible, you know? And so like when we actually think of Jesus as a person dealing with a political system that's making choices for him and his family while he's young, and then even as he's older, the realities of the way his communities were organized that he interacted with, we begin to see that a lot of the decisions he makes, a lot of the ways in which he interacts, have political consequences. Ultimately, dying on a cross is a political consequence. For us, we've kind of spiritualized that and missed the piece that this is what Rome used to execute insurrectionists, of which Jesus was considered an insurrectionist. So it's important that we understand that. For today, we're going to talk about probably, I would say, the two most politically charged things that Jesus does in all of the scriptures, okay? And this is in Matthew 21. It's the triumphal entry. So here's how it goes down. Jesus has all these disciples, and the letter A is going. Anyone in letter A? No, I'm just kidding. All right, so Jesus has all these disciples. They're kind of like, you know, his youth group, if you will. He sends them to go get a donkey for him. And you're like, interesting. So they go into town, they go get this donkey. If anyone asks you when you're taking the donkey, you know, if you should steal a donkey, because that's kind of a big deal. It's actually Levitical law to steal a donkey was a big deal. Primary offense. But Jesus is like, if someone asks you, just tell them it's for me. And so that's what happens. They get the donkey, they bring it to Jesus, because Jesus is going into town for Passover. But there's this thing in the prophecy of the Old Testament that says the king's going to come in on a donkey. And so he's preparing a statement. He's saying to everyone, I'm the king. Remember, we talked about the political statement of his birth being that he was the King of Kings at birth, and that statement being a statement that called into question the powers of his day, that being a political statement. When people say Jesus is Lord, what was the common saying of the day? Caesar is Lord. So that is a political statement. Now Jesus is saying, I'm coming in on a donkey, making a statement that the king everyone sees, the authority everyone sees here, Rome, even the Pharisees and the Sadducees being the religious authority, no, I'm the king. And so what ends up happening is, I'll read just a short portion of this. The disciples went and did as Jesus instructed them. They brought the donkey and the colt, placed their cloaks on them, and Jesus sat on them. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. Now, important to say, these are palm fronds. This is the flag, if you will, for Israel. All right. So this is like a national celebration of this prophecy, this reclaiming of independence. For them, they see Jesus as coming in as a warrior. He's going to take charge. They're misunderstanding Jesus, what he's representing, in the sense that the disciples thought being with Jesus was likely going to mean they were going to have political power, they were going to come back into power. Jesus' power, which is very interesting, is kind of this upside down power that serves in the way in which his power operates, instead of operating over people, serving people. Jesus is coming in that way. All these people are seeing it, and what they're shouting is Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred, and asked, "Who is this?" The crowd answered, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee." Now, in other passages, this is in all of our Gospels, this particular story, which is unique in the sense that it's in all four. But in this particular one, we also have, or in other particular ones, we also have the Pharisees and Sadducees' response. And they're like, "What is he doing?" Like, that's the Justin paraphrase for what they said. Because what you have to understand, the politics of this decision for Jesus to come in on a donkey and make this statement is really problematic for the religious leaders. And let me kind of just explain the politics of what's happening. These religious leaders had made a deal with Rome that they could have their temple rituals if they just followed what Rome asked them to do. If, in essence, they didn't disrupt the system, they kept everything, the fake kind of phony peace. Have you ever been in a situation maybe with a relationship or a friend where you're like, or former friend, where you're like, we're going to be in the same proximity, we're going to kind of act like we're friends, but we're really not. That's kind of what's happening here on a very large level. And the power is not with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The power rests fully with Rome. And so if they go out of bounds, if they create a revolt during the middle of Passover, where all of this influx of people are in town for Passover, it's going to cause them a lot of problems with Rome, including the potential that they might get kicked out of the temple, which is for them the only way they see of relating to God. So Jesus is now a threat, because Jesus is bringing about this stirring in the people's consciousness. We are being oppressed, and he is calling in to even question our oppression, and also making a statement that we need a king again. We need freedom again. This is going to cause a lot of problems for Rome, because they can't in any way police the amount of people that are in the city right now. So this is an incredibly charged scenario. What Jesus does next is takes an incredibly charged scenario and says, let's turn it up to 10 because I like punk rock. He literally completely, the next thing is, in my opinion, the most political thing he does. Because here's the deal. Politics and economics can't be taken apart. Economics is a big part of politics. Okay, how we organize our money, how we care for people. So the next thing Jesus does is he walks into the temple and he sees money changers. And so it's important to recognize that if all of us were to go to Passover at this particular time, we would bring a lamb with us if we were, middle class or wealthy. But if you're not middle class or wealthy, if you're poor and you need to make a sacrifice, you would come in, you would purchase a dove or something small. And what they are doing here is, this is, good old kind of capitalism, in that supply and demand. You have to make a sacrifice to be made right with God, for you and your family to be made right with God. So we're going to go ahead and hike those prices up. We're not just going to hike the prices up. We're going to bring all this exchange of goods into the temple when it was supposed to be outside of the temple. So not only are we taking advantage of people, but we're bringing it into the temple where it's happening. Jesus sees this after coming in, seeing the people celebrate him, but also the idea of freedom. And what does he do? He walks right into the temple and sees that the religious people are also a form of oppression. It's not just Rome that's oppressing. It's the religious people that are also oppressing. So Jesus walks in and starts flipping tables over. You have to understand how incredible, like the fact that Jesus didn't die on the spot is kind of shocking in this particular culture and situation. He is disrupting the economics of Passover. Not only is this a highly ritualized thing that he's bringing disorder to, that for many with their fundamental dogmatic viewpoint of how Passover should go, him coming in and doing this is causing all kinds of problems. But it actually says in one passage he took a whip and started whipping, and not that he whipped people, but that it's likely that the sound of the crack of the whip is sending animals everywhere. So all these animals that were meant for sacrifice are now going crazy everywhere. Everyone's trying to catch animals. Money's just flowing over. We don't know if the poor people are grabbing the money and running. We don't know if this is like a Robin Hood situation. Like, this is a crazy scenario. And it says after this happens, they were indignant. They were so angry. The priests and the teachers of the law were so angry with Jesus. It's my belief that this move to flip tables is actually what gets Jesus put on a cross. Like, he doesn't do that. I don't know that he goes on a cross. That was a big problem. They saw this as just too much disruption within the system that they were very connected to. So let's talk about 3 points. I got 3 points to make from these two stories that I think are incredibly politically charged. 1, Jesus calls into question how the powerful hold their power. Jesus calls into question how the powerful hold their power. And if that is true about the politics of Jesus, it should be true about our politics and our own lives. So, if we have powerful people in our world, we should call into question, how do they hold that power? Are they oppressing people with that power? And if I have a vote or a way of intervening, writing a letter, what is my responsibility to call into question the way they're holding that power? And here's maybe the deeper thing, even in this section, it's political as well. What power do I hold? And I'm going to use 2 words here, power or privilege do I hold? How aware of this power or privilege am I? Am I holding this well? Am I having other people around me speak into the ways I might be holding it improperly, that I maybe am not even aware of? Power dynamics are a big part of politics. It was in the day of Jesus, and it is still today. I'm not telling you how to consider those things. I'm saying we should all be examining our own power, how we're holding it, and in a collective of a nation, of a people across the world, considering even how the powerful hold their power and calling that into question when necessary. Point number 2, Jesus sides with the oppressed. In this story, there are people being oppressed by Rome. Him coming in on a donkey is making a statement that freedom from this oppression is ultimately something necessary. Now, that's not the only thing he's saying, okay? There's a spiritual freedom here too, because he's also calling into question the religious practices. He's calling into question 2 systems. The religious politics of the day, because quite honestly, at this time, you cannot divorce the religion and the politics of the time. They are linked. And Jesus is siding with the people who are oppressed, the people who he's watching give away their life savings so that they can buy a dove to feel connected to God. And that's making him furious. And he sides with them. He doesn't side with keeping the peace, keeping this false idea of peace when people are being oppressed. He instead says, this is wrong. So 2 things, because I want to be macro, but I also want us to be introspective, right? Okay, so macro, what tables in our world need flipped? Right? Like, for real, like what tables in our world need flipped? Number 2, what tables are you sitting behind that you need to get up from? Okay? What tables are you sitting behind that you need to get up from? We can't just do one or the other. We have to think introspectively. What tables am I sitting behind that I think I need to get up and walk away from this, because this is a system that's not siding with the oppressed people? And in what ways can I go and flip tables that are ultimately going to help or inspire people to leave that system? I'm not saying you got to go in and, just flip tables necessarily. Jesus doesn't flip tables his entire ministry. He does it once, okay? That's another thing important to note. We shouldn't just constantly be going in everywhere flipping tables. But I do think sometimes we could use some table flipping energy, you know what I mean? And I tend to do that pretty easily, so I have to say don't flip the tables. But for some of you, maybe flipping tables is like the last possible thing you would ever do, and you kind of need, that little kick to say, it's okay, Jesus did this. But he didn't just do it to flip tables. He did it because oppressed people were being hurt. He did it because there were people being taken advantage of, and it just wasn't right. All right, next. Jesus risks his own power, his own social status, and his own safety to stand with the marginalized. Just want to say that one more time. Jesus risks his own power, his own social status, and safety to stand with the marginalized. For Jesus, the politics of Jesus were not about amassing more power, were not about amassing more privilege, not about amassing more popularity. He's laying all that down, including his own life, for the sake of the way he holds his politics. So if our politics are simply being driven by amassing popularity, amassing the amount of votes, amassing power, whatever, this isn't the way, the model of Jesus. So to commit to the system of even a democracy where we're trying to get as many votes as we can, right? I'm not saying there's not some practicality in that's good. But for Jesus, he's not trying to work within the system. He's trying to call into question the system. And I think at times we need to even say, in what ways do I need to even risk my own power and privilege, my own social standing? And who knows, maybe even my own safety to stand with the marginalized. Now let me be clear. I'm not telling you to, go out and put yourself in harm's way, but I will say this. How many of you have ever read Martin Luther King Jr. and been inspired or heard him speak? Why are these stories inspirational? Because they risk everything for the cause that they're behind. If God inspires you for a particular cause, what does it look like to risk more is the question. I'm not going to tell you what and quantify what you should risk and tell you right now that Jesus is calling you to risk your life. That's not for me to decide. But what I will say is if Jesus inspires you for a particular cause or connects you to people who are connected to a particular cause, what does it look like for you to say, I'm willing to risk some things to see this people or this particular cause advanced? Jesus was willing to risk, and I think we should be too. So, there's this book. Every week I said I would give a resource at the end of every week by my friend Johnny Rashid. Johnny Rashid is a pastor at Circle of Hope in Philadelphia. And it's a book called Jesus Takes a Side. And it's embracing the political demands of the gospel. And this is a very political book, okay? But ultimately, his primary point is that Jesus is siding with the oppressed. If you are not a reader, I interviewed Johnny on my podcast. I'll post it this week in our group, and you can find that link there. If you're like, I would rather just hear him talk for an hour to Justin, and that's enough for me. I don't need to read the book. I do think we might have actually posted it once already. You may have already checked that out a while back ago. But as we're in this series, I felt like it was a good resource for us to consider. So what we're going to do now is we are going to talk around our table, so you can get back in your groups here in a moment. And the question we're going to answer is, in what practical ways can you side with the oppressed in our world today? Or maybe ways you are already doing that, or ways that you can expand that. And then if there's other questions or other prompts that you had as I was speaking, maybe you want to share something with your group about what connected with you today. We're going to have about 10 minutes of just group time, chat time, and then I'll close us in prayer.